The only man I'll ever trust with this Ferrari is the man my son chooses." The billionaire CEO said it with a smile, and 300 wealthy guests laughed along with her. Then her 9-year-old son did something nobody expected. He walked past the investors, past the collectors, past the men wearing watches worth more than my garage. Straight toward me, a black single dad in an oil-stained work shirt standing near the back wall. Without saying a word, he pressed an old brass keychain into my hand. The moment I looked at the tiny numbers engraved inside it, my stomach dropped. Because the Ferrari wasn't broken. It was hiding a secret. And by sunrise, that secret would threaten a billion-dollar empire. Before I tell you what was hidden inside that car, you need to understand why that little boy trusted me in the first place. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if stories about fathers, dignity, and second chances mean something to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 43 years old, a black single dad, and the owner of a one-bay repair shop on the edge of Greenville, South Carolina. When people hear the word garage, they usually imagine a busy business with shiny floors and 10 mechanics running around. Mine isn't like that. My shop sits behind an old brick building that used to be a feed store 30 years ago. The paint is fading. The sign hangs a little crooked. And when it rains hard enough, I still have to put a bucket in the corner to catch a leak in the roof. But everything I have came from that garage. Everything except my daughter. My daughter Ava came from something much greater. Ava is 11 years old, smart as a whip, loves science projects, model bridges, and asking questions I sometimes don't know how to answer. Most afternoons, she sits at a small folding table in the corner of my shop doing homework while I work on engines. The truth is, that garage became our home after my wife died. 3 years earlier, cancer took her faster than either of us expected. 1 month, we were planning a family vacation. 6 months later, I was standing beside a hospital bed trying to explain to a crying little girl why Mommy wasn't coming home. Nobody teaches you how to do that. Nobody teaches you how to be both parents overnight. You just wake up the next morning and keep moving because your child needs breakfast. That's how life became for me. Wake up. Make Ava's lunch. Drive her to school, open the garage, work until dark, repeat. I wasn't rich, I wasn't important, and I definitely wasn't the kind of man billionaire CEOs invited to fancy events. But I was good at one thing: cars, especially old ones. The kind most mechanics refuse to touch. The kind that hide their problems beneath layers of history. My father taught me that. He was a mechanic too. One of the first lessons he ever gave me was simple. The machine always tells the truth. Son, you just have to listen. That lesson paid our bills for 20 years, and it was about to change my life. The first time I noticed Ethan Hale was nearly 6 months before the charity auction. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old, a quiet kid, always standing slightly behind the adults around him. Most wealthy children I met arrived with confidence. Ethan arrived with caution. The strange thing was that every few weeks, a black SUV would stop across the street from my garage. The driver never got out. The security detail stayed inside, but the boy would stare through the window toward my shop. Not at me, not at the building, at the cars, especially the old Ferrari I was restoring near the entrance. At the time, I thought nothing of it. I had no idea that little boy was watching me. And I definitely had no idea that somewhere in his pocket was an old brass keychain that would soon connect both of our lives forever. About 6 months after I first noticed Ethan watching my garage, I finally learned who he was. And trust me, it wasn't because somebody introduced us. It was because the entire state seemed to be talking about his mother. Victoria Hale, founder and CEO of Hale Dynamics, tech billionaire, business magazine cover regular, owner of one of the largest private luxury car collections in the Southeast. The kind of woman whose name opened doors before she even entered the room. I first heard about her from a customer who wouldn't stop talking while I changed the clutch on his Porsche. "She's got a Ferrari nobody can start," he said. I remember laughing. Every car starts. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But machines don't keep secrets forever. At least, that's what I believed then. A month later, I received a phone call that made me think somebody was playing a prank. The woman on the phone introduced herself as an assistant from Hale Estates. She wanted to know if Marcus Reed Restoration could inspect a vehicle. When she named the car, I nearly dropped my wrench. A Ferrari 288 GTO, one of the rarest Ferraris ever built. Most mechanics spend their entire careers without touching one. I asked why they were calling me. There was a long pause. Then she said something interesting. "Because every expert we've hired has failed." 3 days later, I drove my old pickup truck through the gates of Hale Estates. The place looked more like a private resort than a home. Stone fountains, perfect gardens, security guards, a private garage larger than some dealerships. The moment I stepped out of my truck, I felt exactly what the wealthy people around me saw. Not a specialist, not a craftsman, not a business owner, just a mechanic. The help. One man in a tailored suit actually glanced at my truck and smirked. Another asked if I was there to make a delivery. I ignored both of them. My father taught me long ago that insecure people talk loudly because they need witnesses. Confident people let their work speak. Inside the collection garage sat dozens of luxury cars. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, Lamborghinis, Porsches, and at the center of them all sat the Ferrari. Red, perfect, silent, like it was waiting. That's when I saw Victoria Hale for the first time. Elegant, confident, and exhausted. The kind of exhausted money can't fix. Standing beside her was Ethan, the same quiet boy who used to watch my garage from across the street. His eyes widened slightly when he recognized me. Mine probably did too. Victoria extended a hand. I shook it. Barely. She looked me up and down before speaking. "Mr. Reed, if you can start that Ferrari, you'll accomplish something a dozen experts couldn't." The men around her chuckled. Then she smiled and added something that sounded like a joke. "The only man I'll ever trust with this Ferrari is the man my son chooses." Everyone laughed. Everyone except Ethan. Because while the others thought it was a joke, the boy was staring at me with a look I couldn't quite understand, and I was about to discover why. I spent the first 20 minutes doing exactly what every mechanic does before touching a tool. I watched. People think fixing cars starts with turning wrenches. It doesn't. It starts with listening. The Ferrari sat under bright showroom lights, spotless enough to belong in a museum. According to Victoria's team, specialists from 3 different states had already examined it. Ferrari-certified technicians had inspected the fuel system, ignition components, wiring harnesses, sensors, and engine management systems. Everything checked out. On paper, the car should have started immediately, but it didn't. That bothered me. Machines don't make emotional decisions. People do. Machines follow rules. So if the Ferrari refused to start, there had to be a reason. One of the investors standing nearby folded his arms and watched me. "You think you'll find something 12 experts missed?" His tone made it clear he already knew the answer. Before I could respond, another man laughed. "Maybe the car just likes billionaires." Several people smiled. Victoria didn't. She wasn't openly rude, but she didn't exactly defend me either. To her, I was probably one more mechanic about to fail. I couldn't blame her. By that point, she'd spent a fortune trying to solve the problem. I opened the hood. The engine bay looked remarkably clean. Almost too clean. Whoever maintained the car had taken exceptional care of it. As I inspected the components, I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. Ethan. The boy stood quietly beside a workbench, watching every step. Unlike the adults, he wasn't watching me fail. He was watching me work. There is a difference. A big one. Meanwhile, back at my garage, Ava was finishing a science project and texting me updates every 30 minutes. One message made me smile. Don't let rich people boss you around. Dad. That was my daughter. Always direct. Always honest. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and continued inspecting the Ferrari. Hours passed. I checked fuel pressure, electrical systems, ground connections, control modules. Everything looked normal, yet something felt wrong. Not mechanical. Personal. The car carried the strange feeling of a room someone had carefully cleaned after hiding something. Then I noticed Ethan walking closer. He wasn't supposed to be near the vehicle, but nobody stopped him. He stood beside me for several seconds, silent, studying the Ferrari. Then his eyes moved to a small object hanging from his pocket. A worn brass keychain. Old. Scratched. Completely out of place among the luxury surrounding him. I recognized it immediately. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't decorative. It looked like something a working man would carry. The kind of item most rich people would overlook without a second glance. Ethan noticed me looking at it. For the first time all day, our eyes met. And something passed between us. Not a conversation. Not exactly. But enough to make me pay attention. Then his nanny called him away. The keychain disappeared back into his pocket. The moment lasted only a few seconds. Yet somehow, I couldn't stop thinking about it, because every part of that Ferrari looked perfect. And when everything looks perfect, that's usually where the real problem is hiding. I didn't know it yet, but that little brass keychain was about to reveal a secret far bigger than a broken Ferrari. The next morning, I returned to Hale Estates before sunrise. That wasn't because anyone asked me to. It was because something about that Ferrari kept bothering me. Good mechanics learn to trust that feeling. Not every clue announces itself. Sometimes the truth whispers. The estate was quiet when I arrived. Most of the staff hadn't shown up yet. The giant garage felt different without investors, executives, and spectators standing around pretending they knew more than the people doing the actual work. For the first time, I could think. I spent nearly 2 hours examining the Ferrari again. The engine was flawless. The fuel system was flawless. The electrical system was flawless. Which left me with one uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the problem wasn't under the hood. Maybe someone wanted everyone looking in the wrong place. My father used to say something when we restored classic cars together. When a mystery survives this long, stop asking what's broken. Start asking who's benefiting. That thought stayed with me. I walked around the Ferrari slowly, studying every panel, every compartment, every modification, every detail. Then I noticed something strange. The glove compartment lock had been replaced. Not recently. Years ago. The replacement wasn't wrong. It was simply unnecessary. People don't replace original Ferrari locks without a reason. I opened the compartment. Nothing. Just registration papers, maintenance records, insurance documents, perfectly ordinary. Too ordinary. I removed everything and checked the back panel. Still nothing. But the replacement lock kept bothering me. Then I heard footsteps. I looked up and saw Ethan standing nearby. Alone. Again. The boy seemed to appear whenever everyone else disappeared. He walked toward the Ferrari without speaking. Then he reached into his pocket. My eyes immediately found the brass keychain. The same one. Old. Worn. Scratched. Unlike anything else in that garage. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he looked at me. Finally, he held it out. Not to show me. To give it to me. I hesitated. Are you sure? Buddy, he nodded. That was all? Just one small nod. I took the keychain and turned it over in my hands. At first glance, it looked worthless. Cheap brass, faded lettering, years of wear. Then I noticed something carved into the inside edge. Tiny numbers, almost invisible. Not random numbers. Coordinates, or at least part of them. My pulse quickened. This wasn't a souvenir. It wasn't decoration. Someone had intentionally hidden information inside that keychain. I looked up at Ethan. Where did you get this? He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward a framed photograph hanging across the room. A picture of his late father standing beside the Ferrari. That single gesture told me everything. The keychain had belonged to his father. And somehow, Ethan knew it mattered. I studied the numbers again. The more I looked, the more certain I became. Those markings weren't connected to the Ferrari's mechanics. They were connected to something hidden, something deliberate, something important enough for a man to leave behind before he died. At that moment, the Ferrari stopped looking like a broken luxury car. It started looking like a vault. And I was beginning to suspect that the old brass keychain wasn't the clue. It was the key. I took the brass keychain home that evening with Victoria's permission. Not because I wanted to keep it, because I couldn't stop thinking about it. Ava was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked through the door. Her science fair bridge was spread across half the room, surrounded by rulers, glue sticks, and enough cardboard to build a small city. She looked up immediately. Did the Ferrari finally start? I smiled. Not yet. That answer usually would have disappointed her. Instead, she noticed something else. The keychain. Dad, what's that? I placed it carefully on the table. I think it's the reason the Ferrari won't start. She laughed. It's a keychain. Exactly. My father would have liked that answer. Because he taught me something most people never learn. The biggest secrets rarely look important. The truly important things hide inside ordinary objects. An old wrench, a faded notebook, a handwritten note, a tiny part, or a worn brass keychain worth less than $10. After Ava went to bed, I stayed at the table studying the numbers carved into the metal. Hours passed. Then suddenly, something clicked. The sequence wasn't a complete coordinate. It was half of one. The remaining digits were missing. At first, that seemed impossible. Then I remembered where I'd seen similar markings before. Aircraft maintenance logs, classic restoration records, security access codes. Sometimes information isn't stored in one place. It's divided into pieces. That way nobody can use it without finding the rest. My pulse quickened. Someone had intentionally split the information, which meant someone had wanted it hidden. The next morning I returned to Hale Estates. Victoria met me outside the garage. She looked tired. More tired than before. Any progress? she asked. Maybe. That wasn't the answer she wanted. I could tell. Behind her stood several executives from Hale Dynamics. One of them, a sharply dressed CFO named Richard Lawson, looked particularly annoyed by my presence. The man had barely acknowledged me during previous visits. Now he seemed unusually interested in everything I was doing. That alone made me suspicious. I asked Victoria a simple question. Who was the last person to work closely with your husband before he died? Her expression changed immediately. Richard. The CFO's face remained calm. Too calm. I've spent my entire life around engines. When a machine is working too smoothly, you check it twice. The same applies to people. Then Victoria told me something nobody had mentioned before. A few months before his death, her husband had become obsessed with reviewing internal financial records, late nights, private meetings, locked files, arguments with senior executives, and then he died suddenly in what everyone accepted as a tragic accident. At that moment, the brass keychain felt heavier in my pocket. Not physically, emotionally, because I was beginning to understand something terrifying. The Ferrari wasn't connected to a family memory. It wasn't connected to grief. It wasn't connected to nostalgia. It was connected to something somebody wanted buried. And if I was right, a dead billionaire had hidden part of the truth inside a Ferrari before anyone realized he was gone. The breakthrough came from something nobody expected. Not a computer. Not a financial investigator. Not one of the highly paid consultants surrounding Victoria. It came from the Ferrari itself. 3 days after my conversation with Victoria, I returned to the garage with a theory. If the brass keychain contained half the code, then the second half had to be hidden somewhere connected to its owner, and there was only one place that made sense. The Ferrari. I asked for complete privacy. That request immediately annoyed several executives, especially Richard Lawson. The CFO had become increasingly interested in my work ever since I mentioned the keychain. Every time I arrived, he somehow appeared. Every time I asked questions, he had answers ready. Too ready. Victoria noticed it too. For the first time, she instructed everyone except me to leave the garage. The massive room finally fell silent. Just me, the Ferrari, and years of secrets. I started where most people never think to look. Not under the hood, not inside the engine. Inside the history. Classic car restorers learn something valuable over time. Owners leave fingerprints, not physical fingerprints, personal ones, habits, choices, modifications, tiny decisions. The replacement glove compartment lock suddenly made sense. It wasn't protecting what was inside. It was drawing attention away from somewhere else. I removed several interior panels and carefully inspected the dashboard assembly. Nothing. Then I examined the center console. Still nothing. Hours passed. My hands were covered in dust and grease when I finally noticed a slight inconsistency beneath the passenger seat rails, less than a quarter inch. Barely visible. Most people would never have seen it. But the car was trying to tell me something. I removed the seat, then the carpet. Underneath was a custom metal plate secured with non-factory hardware. My heart started pounding. Because Ferrari hadn't installed it. Someone else had. I removed the screws, lifted the plate, and found a hidden compartment. Inside sat a weatherproof envelope. Nothing more, nothing less. The moment I opened it, I knew this story had never been about a Ferrari. Inside were handwritten notes, financial records, bank transfers, offshore accounts, copies of internal company reports, and a notebook filled with detailed observations written by Victoria's late husband. Page after page documented missing company funds, fraud, embezzlement, Millions of dollars, all connected to one person, Richard Lawson, the CFO. I sat there staring at the evidence for several minutes. The dead billionaire had known. He had discovered everything before his death. And somehow he realized he might not get the chance to expose it. So he hid the proof. Then he left clues behind for someone he trusted to find. The keychain, the Ferrari, the compartment. Everything suddenly fit together. Victoria arrived less than an hour later. I handed her the notebook. She read only 3 pages before tears filled her eyes. Not because of the money, because she was reading her husband's handwriting again. His thoughts, his warnings, his final attempt to protect his family. Then something happened that I'll never forget. Quiet little Ethan stepped forward. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked directly at me and spoke. A single sentence. Clear and certain. My dad knew you'd find it. And in that moment, everyone finally understood. The Ferrari had never been hiding a mechanical problem. It had been protecting a secret. And by morning, that secret was going to change everything. By the next afternoon, the entire atmosphere at Hale Estates had changed. The Ferrari still sat in the center of the garage, but nobody was talking about the car anymore. They were talking about the notebook, the evidence, the hidden accounts, the missing millions. Lawyers arrived, auditors arrived, board members arrived. People who had spent years smiling at one another suddenly stopped making eye contact. And through all of it, I kept thinking about something my father used to tell me. The truth doesn't create problems, son. It reveals the ones that were already there. The truth was finally doing exactly that. Victoria spent most of the day in meetings with attorneys and investigators. Ethan stayed close to his nanny, though I noticed he seemed lighter somehow, like a weight he'd been carrying for years had finally started to lift. Late that evening, Victoria asked me to meet her in her private office. I almost declined. Not because I was angry, because I had a feeling I knew where the conversation was heading. When I entered, she was standing by the window overlooking the estate. For a moment, she looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like a tired widow trying to hold her family together. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I owe you more than I can ever repay." I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything." She gave a small smile. "That's exactly why I trust you." Then she opened a folder and slid it across the desk. Inside was an offer, a very large one, a cash payment, a consulting contract, ownership shares in one of her restoration ventures. Enough money to change my life forever. Enough money to ensure Ava and I would never struggle again. For a moment, I won't lie to you, I thought about it. I thought about college tuition, a better house, a bigger garage. Every parent understands that temptation. Then I looked down at my phone. A text message had arrived from Ava. It was a picture of her science fair bridge. Underneath it, she had written, "Hope you're doing the right thing. Dad." Just that. Nothing more. I stared at those words for several seconds. Then I closed the folder. Victoria looked surprised. "You're turning it down." "Most of it." Her eyebrows lifted. "Why?" I leaned back in my chair. Because the answer mattered. Because I didn't find that notebook for money. Silence filled the room. "My daughter was watching," I continued. "Every decision I've made since her mother died has been something she'll remember someday. I don't want her thinking integrity as a price tag." Victoria didn't speak. She simply listened. "The Ferrari wasn't trying to make me rich," I said. "The car was trying to tell me something. Your husband left a promise behind. I just happened to hear it. For the first time since we'd met. Her eyes filled with tears. Not dramatic tears. Quiet ones. The kind people fight hard to hide. And before I left that office, she said something I'll never forget. Marcus, in a world full of people who wanted something from me, you're the first person who wanted to do the right thing instead. But neither of us realized the storm that statement was about to unleash. Because by morning, Richard Lawson was going to make one final move. And it would put everything at risk. The next morning began with flashing cameras outside Hale Dynamics headquarters. By noon, it looked like a storm had hit the company. News crews lined the streets. Board members rushed through private entrances. Law firms released statements. And for the first time in years, people were asking questions Richard Lawson couldn't control. The evidence from the hidden compartment was undeniable. Every transfer, every account, every forged authorization, all of it traced back to him, too. What nobody expected was how desperately he would fight to save himself. By mid-afternoon, Richard publicly claimed the notebook was fabricated. Then he claimed the documents had been planted. Then he implied I had somehow manipulated the entire discovery. That part almost made me laugh. A black mechanic from a one-bay garage was apparently the mastermind behind a multi-million-dollar corporate conspiracy. Some people will believe anything except the truth. Victoria didn't laugh. She marched directly into an emergency board meeting, carrying her late husband's notebook in her hands. 3 hours later, Richard Lawson was removed from his position. 2 days after that, federal investigators arrived. The rest took care of itself. The truth tends to have momentum once it starts moving. But what stayed with me wasn't Richard's downfall. It was what happened afterward. A week later, Victoria invited me and Ava to a small gathering at the estate. No reporters. No executives. No investors. Just family. For the first time since I had met him, Ethan seemed like an ordinary 9-year-old boy. He wasn't hiding behind adults anymore. He wasn't silently observing from corners. He was outside throwing a football with a few friends, laughing, running, being a kid. The sound stopped me in my tracks, because some victories don't show up on balance sheets. Some victories sound like a child laughing again. Ava noticed it too. She smiled and nudged my arm. He sounds happier. Yeah, I said softly. He does. Later that evening, Victoria gathered everyone in the garage. The Ferrari sat in its usual place, only now it felt different. The secret was gone. The burden was gone. The truth had finally been allowed into the light. Victoria stepped forward and addressed the small group. Then she surprised me. She publicly apologized. Not for the investigation, not for the challenge, for misjudging me. She admitted that when she first saw my old pickup truck pull through the gates, she'd assumed I was just another mechanic who would fail like everyone else. The room became very quiet. Then she looked directly at me. Marcus Reed reminded me that character doesn't arrive in a luxury car. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Ethan walked over, carrying something in his hand. The brass keychain. The same one that had started everything. He held it out toward me. Not as evidence. Not as a clue. As a gift. And when I accepted it, I realized the Ferrari had done far more than expose a thief. It had reunited a family with the truth. But the most important lesson was still waiting for me at home. A month after everything happened, life looked surprisingly ordinary again. And honestly, that's exactly how I wanted it. Most mornings, I was back in my garage before sunrise. The same old brick building, The same coffee mug stained from years of use. The same worn tools hanging on the wall. The only real difference was the small brass keychain hanging beside my workbench. The keychain had become a reminder, not of wealth, not of the Ferrari, not even of the secret hidden beneath its floor. It reminded me that small things matter. A tiny clue, a small choice, a quiet act of integrity. Sometimes those are the things that change entire lives. One afternoon, Ava sat at her usual folding table finishing a school assignment. Her science fair bridge had won second place. She still insisted it should have won first. I smiled every time she complained about it. While I worked on an old Porsche engine, she suddenly asked a question. "Dad, why didn't you take all the money?" I stopped turning the wrench, not because I didn't have an answer, because I wanted to give her the right one. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and sat beside her. "Do you remember what Grandpa always used to say?" She nodded. "Do the job right, even when nobody's watching." "That's right." She thought about it for a moment. Then she smiled. "I guess I was watching." I laughed. "Yeah, kiddo. You were." And that was the whole point. Children are always watching, not listening. Watching. They watch how we treat people, how we handle disappointment, how we respond when money, power, or pride try to pull us away from who we are. They learn from what we do far more than what we say. A year later, the Ferrari finally started. Not because it had been repaired, because it had been released. The hidden compartment was empty. The burden was gone. The truth was no longer trapped inside it. Victoria and Ethan came to the garage that day. No reporters, no executives, no headlines, just family. Before they left, Ethan walked over to the wall where the brass keychain hung. He smiled, then he said something that reminded me of his father. "My dad would have liked you." I won't pretend that didn't hit me hard, because some compliments mean more than money ever could. As I watched them drive away, I realized something important. The most valuable thing I fixed wasn't a Ferrari, it wasn't a company, it wasn't even a hidden secret. The most valuable thing I helped repair was trust. Trust between a father and son. Trust between a mother and her child. And trust in the idea that dignity still matters. Because at the end of the day, the things most worth fixing are rarely found under the hood. They're found inside people. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your job, your background, or the car you drove? Have you ever had to say no to something valuable because it wasn't the right thing to do? Or have you ever discovered that one small detail, a note, a photograph, an old key, or a simple conversation, changed everything? Share your story below. I read as many comments as I can, and I truly enjoy hearing them. And if you believe that character matters more than status, that dignity matters more than money, and that doing the right thing is always worth it, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next story. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of your family, and never underestimate the power of one small choice.